And so Jonathan cuts a covenant with David, and then Jonathan takes his bow, his arrows, his sword, his armor, his cloak, his royal robe, and he gives them as a present to David, with David giving nothing in return. What did all this mean? Well, what it meant quite clearly, as we grow to understand more and more of ancient customs in Israel, was this: that Jonathan was acknowledging David's right to succeed him as king. And Jonathan was giving up his right of succession to the throne. Quite an amazing thing, was it not? An amazing thing. An absolutely amazing thing. Clarence Macartney wrote this. He was the crown prince, and next to the throne, until that day, the most popular man in Israel. It was all to his advantage that David's heroic deeds should be discounted and belittled. The ordinary man would have done that. But Jonathan was no ordinary man. Jonathan was a man of faith. Jonathan very likely had heard Samuel's words to his father, that the kingdom has been taken away from you and given to a man who's better than you. And one day he saw the man, he met the young man that was better than his father. And he gave up his rights. And he let David know that he was giving up his rights to succession, that David might be the king after God's own heart. What a wonderful beginning of friendship. What a wonderful short narrative here in 1 Samuel 18. I have just a couple of concluding lessons about this. We have herein an example of the faithfulness that should mark all true friendships. Here's something about the faithfulness that should mark all true friendships. If you have a friend who remotely resembles this, thank God. Thank God for them. If you have anybody whose soul vibrates in harmony with yours, thank God for them. Pray that God would bless that relationship, that you will be a blessing to them, that they will be a blessing to you, that you will never be a snare to them, that they will never be a snare to you, but that the relationship might only result in things that are positive. And we have here an example of the faithfulness that should mark all true friendships. Jonathan loved David throughout his lifetime. It cost him to do so. It alienated him from his father. His father not only tried to pin David to the wall with his javelin, he tried to pin Jonathan to the wall with his javelin. When he came to learn how close was the relationship between Jonathan and David, it cost Jonathan to have David as his friend. But he persevered in the friendship, even though it cost him dearly with his own relationship with his father. Throughout all of this, Jonathan manifested himself to be the friend that sticks closer than a brother. Listen to this by Morris Roberts. I would encourage you to buy this in the bookstore, this collection of essays that he's had in Banner of Truth, The Thought of God by Morris Roberts. And read the essay on Christian friendships, but listen to these words. Friendship is good and necessary for us, just as in most cases marriage is necessary. Friendship corrects our angularity and rubs off our corners. The recluse is the first to fall into eccentricities. The more we're with ourselves, the more we become like ourselves. It's only the circle of our godly friends, once again, that we realize how awkward or else opinionated we've become as Christians. We all go astray like sheep, but we go astray less if we keep within the flock and refuse the temptation to wander off into solitary pastures where we're all on our own. This fact alone should have been enough to warn the early Christian ascetics against the monastic cell. But history shows that it was not. The monk's cell was the ideal situation for the development of quirks and crankish habits of spiritual character. Healthy Christian character, which is full-orbed, well-rounded, and rich in good fruits, can best be formed within the circle of sanctified friendships. And then he goes on to say this. He says, generally speaking, when we are depressed and dejected, we should seek the remedy, not in prayer and fasting, but in fellowship and friendship. As Luther's letters wisely say, we ought not to go to prayer when we're depressed, but into the company of good people. What a wonderful statement. Into the company of good people. Where you may call a friend someday when you're depressed and dejected, and you might say, I don't want to talk about anything. I just want to do something together. Just want to get away. Just want to do something. Could you make the time to do that? And a friend will not need any more explanation than that. Just says yes. How we ought to thank God for people who can fill that kind of role that we need. What an example. This friendship of Jonathan to David. He was the friend that sticks closer than a brother. Proverbs 18:24. And then I end with this, to try to link it, to segue, as it were, in a legitimate way into the celebration of the Lord's Supper for us tonight. We have herein a reminder of the greatest friend of all, the friend of tax gatherers and sinners. The greatest friend for sinners is the Lord Jesus Christ. Jonathan stripped himself of his royal robe. He stripped himself of his armor. He stripped himself of the rights to succession. He recognized that David had the right of succession. He stripped himself of all of that. Oh, doesn't that point to one? He stripped himself of much more than that to really become the sinner's friend. And my Bible speaks to me in that regard of the Lord Jesus as the friend of sinners. And here is what the Apostle Paul says concerning the sinner's great friend, the Lord Jesus Christ. Although he existed in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant. And being made in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. There's what the Lord Jesus stripped himself of. He was God the Son from all eternity, eternally the second person of the Godhead, from before the foundation of the world. But in order to save sinners, he was willing to execute this divine plan for God the Son to become what he never was, to become a true man, a true body, a true human soul, in the womb and of the substance of the Virgin Mary, to take upon himself what he never had, to humble himself by addition, not by subtraction, to humble himself by addition of a human body, of a human soul, and in that humiliation to live a life of obedience to the law that he uttered on Mount Sinai. And in that humiliation to take the penalties that he uttered against the law broken, the penalty of that law upon himself. And all for what? All for what? All so that everyone who trusts in Him may be forgiven of all the things that you could not be forgiven through the law of Moses, so that everybody who trusts in Him could be justified, having the very righteousness of Jesus Christ credited to our account, and having the wrath of God removed from us. Here's the great friend of sinners. But Jonathan's a picture of it. It was one who was willing to give up rights out of love for another. But what a great picture of the Lord Jesus Christ that He becomes in this. May God bless this simple study of this developing friendship between Jonathan and David.